It was a typical Wellington afternoon in the heart of the capital in 57. What could be loosely termed the lunchtime crowds had all but disappeared. Most city dwellers were now back at work. The area was largely the preserve of homemakers and elderly shoppers. The odd maintenance worker, delivery driver or errant public servant. Everything was ambling along as it normally would midweek in any New Zealand city of the time. That all changed at exactly 2:47. When pedestrian office workers were awakened from their slumber by an almighty noise, it soon became apparent what had happened. The massive 5 stories of scaffolding erected outside the D.I.C store had collapsed onto the footpath, taking out the veranda as well. A frantic search to locate those buried below the tangled mess of frames, tubes and boards had begun. Searchers and onlookers were under no illusions. With such a massive, catastrophic fail such as this, there were bound to be victims. The name Hallenstein is a familiar one to all Kiwis, and not so much its founder, German-born Jew, Bendix Hallenstein. The widely liked and affable Bendix arrived in New Zealand via England and Australia in 1863. The one-time mayor of Queenstown immediately got into wholesaling and retailing with stores in the lower south, the first one being in Invercargill. Over the years, this bloke had fingers in many, many pies. Insurance, clothing, manufacture, farming, exporting, to name just some. Renowned as being a good employer, his company became the first to offer a form of free medical care, come insurance for staff. Shifting his commercial base to Dunedin, along with his wife and 4 daughters, he founded D.I.C in 1884, an acronym for the Drapery and General Importing Company. Starting with the flagship store you are looking at in Dunedin, and then branching out all over the country, Thames to Timaru. In 1929 there were 6 stores nationwide, and by the time of the takeover by Arthur Barnett in 1988, 16. I'm not entirely sure when they opened Lambton Quay in Wellington. As you'll see from the newspaper advert that's staring back at you, they were certainly up and trading in 1893. By the 20s they had outgrown their original building, and plans were made for a new building to be built on the same site. 6 stories, 2 for shopping on the bottom floors, the top 4 offices. At the time it went up in 1928, it was the largest single-framed building in New Zealand. What it looked like now, it's almost complete. And now in 1930. That, my friends, is the background to the events of the 8th of May 1957. Only, it wasn't the first time tragedy would befall a D.I.C store. The name given to the 1908 fire in Christchurch is entirely correct. It started in the same block as D.I.C, in a rival department store called Strangers, and totally obliterated every building on the block. D.I.C Christchurch was only a year behind Dunedin opening. The contents of the surrounding warehouses made it also took down into the flames the then oldest continuous pub running in the city, the White Hart.
Please, God of Fire, take our drapery and furniture shops, but not our pubs.
Go for it, Paul. Give them another taste of that fire sound. The local fire brigades were totally overwhelmed with the ferocity of the fire, became little more than bystanders. Inadequate water pressure was top of their list of issues that evening, and they were having to get water from the Avon River as the mains pressure wasn't up to the job. From the perspective of the leading fire crew that night, the timing of the fire wasn't the best either. You see, and in case you've forgotten, the 7th of February 1908 was a Friday. The bulk of the fire brigade had been in the midst of a works function, and they were all half cut. And then there were the rubberneckers, the Christchurch citizens who wanted to see what the glow and the smoke was about in the middle of the night. By the time they arrived into the middle of the town, there were kilometres of hoses running along the roads going to the Avon River for them to run over in their cars and cabs, which they did with some effect. And this was a Keystone Cops affair. It was a miracle no one was killed. Had it occurred, though, in the middle of the week of a workday, that would have certainly been the case. The government of the day launched an inquiry. They didn't want repeats. And what would be the first of two reviews come commissions stemming from D.I.C calamities, a review of all New Zealand fire brigades and infrastructure began in the form of the gradual installation of high-pressure water supplies in towns and cities. Give me a break, I spent 10 minutes on that sound effect. In the immediate aftermath, it was a chaotic scene. This was one of those rare emergencies where the public's input was on par with the professionals, where old-fashioned brute strength and sheer adrenaline took hold. The crowd took things into their own hands. It was all hands to the deck. A crane from a nearby building site was employed to assist. For even the most casual observer, time was of essence for anyone entombed below the pipes and assorted debris. As people were dragged from the wreckage, the rescuers' and observers' fears were realised, and deaths had invariably occurred. Of those that were injured, 3 of them were serious, life-changing. That headline from the day after is a trifle off the mark. Had this been a typical lunchtime crowd that day, the dead and injured would have been double or more. This was another case of good luck rather than good management. The erecting and dismantling company, called Certified Concrete, were initially in the gun, not just from the authorities and the public. In the days prior to ACC, victims were left to take them to court for compensation. It was clear, as with 08, things needed to be looked at. A Royal Commission of Inquiry into what was termed the D.I.C scaffolding accident was undertaken shortly thereafter. The following headlines at the time tell of the lax, if not in some areas non-existent, regulations overseeing scaffolding at the time. The headlines from the hearings speak for themselves. It was a shit show waiting to happen. Indeed, things were to tighten up. As a Cantabrian who's gone through 2 major earthquakes, and these are eerie pictures indeed. If you take out the deaths from the 2 major building collapses here in Christchurch, verandas and assorted things falling off buildings resulted in a fair few of the deaths and injuries in 2011. If the 2010 earthquake had have occurred mid-afternoon and not mid-evening, we would have seen deaths there as well. It is nice to be sheltered from the rain. Personally, I'd rather get wet than squashed. Thanks to those that support my efforts. There's a term for that. What is it again? Ah, that's right.
Good one, David. David Tour, Olympic bronze medalist at Barcelona. What an achievement that was. $180 to set you away, David.
O for Olsen.
Oh, a vowel. I'm sorry, no vowels. Not yet, anyway.